Welcome back to Brace for Impact, the podcast where we champion modern philanthropy in a changing world. I'm Mary Rose Gunn, the founder and CEO of The Four, the UK's only venture philanthropy fund dedicated to small charities. Here I speak to a bold collective of social entrepreneurs, visionary philanthropists, business leaders and experts who are sharing new ways of solving our society's problems, ways that work. Today, I am delighted to be joined by one of the UK's best-known tech entrepreneurs turned public servants. She first hit the headlines in the late 1990s when she co-founded lastminute.com with Brent Hoberman and has been a powerhouse ever since. After taking lastminute.com public in 2000, she left in 2003 to pursue alternative career adventures, which she has undoubtedly accomplished despite suffering life-changing injuries in a car accident in 2004. She led on addressing issues of digital inequality as the government's digital champion from 2009 to 2013, and then became a life peer chosen by the people to join the House of Lords. She also served on the boards of numerous household name companies, including M&S, Twitter, and currently Chanel. She is also now the president of the British Chambers of Commerce. Today, however, I am keen to investigate a different side of Baroness Martha Lane Fox. Having set up the Antigone Foundation in 2007, she holds many charitable patronages, including Just for Kids Law, AbilityNet and CamFed. She also set up the think tank .everyone, which championed responsible tech between 2015 and 2020. She regularly raises money through extraordinary challenges to her physical and mental strength. And she was a founding trustee and is now a patron of the global human rights charity Reprieve. So, with all of that in mind, I am really looking forward to learning more about her thoughts on effective ways to create social change, including discussing one of the most talked about figures in modern giving, Mackenzie Scott, who has now given away nearly 20 billion in less than 5 years. Baroness Lane Fox, thank you so much for joining me today. The first thing I wanted to ask you is you're so often referred to as a philanthropist, but it's such a broad term. And what for you does that mean?
Firstly, please don't call me Baroness again, Martha only, or I'm going to storm out the studio. Those titles are so ridiculous, aren't they? But thank you for the very generous welcome. Philanthropy is clearly an enormously wide subject and an enormously wide moniker. For me, it really means anything that you do that is giving back to your community or the people around you, or, in a more intensive way, maybe working into an organisation or charity. But, people do tiny acts of philanthropy every day in their lives. And I think sometimes it can become a bit grandiose. People like me seem to be kind of generous philanthropists. And actually, I think it's just about trying to not only do stuff for yourself and your individual commercial gain, but also just more for the community and people around you.
So does that mean that you see some of the work that you're doing in public service almost as a part of philanthropic activity?
Well, I guess so, and then I'm not paid for it. But that's the most base way of looking at it, isn't it? I mean, I'm very lucky. I made some resources post lastminute.com. I'm not deeply motivated by money. I didn't think, I've got to become a gazillionaire. That wasn't what got me out of bed in the morning. So I feel very, very privileged that I can choose to work in the commercial things I do, and then alongside that spend a lot of time doing either small pieces of public service or helping the charities that I work with. But I think, I feel that you can, as we are now living in 2025 with so many more options of how you work, where you work, when you work, it's really rewarding if you have the opportunity to work in some kind of a more service-based work into your life that feels purposeful. Not that people's commercial work isn't purposeful too, but for me, that's what I've been very lucky to be able to achieve over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and I mean, you've achieved a huge amount. I wouldn't say you used the word small in terms of the impact you're having, but I would completely disagree with that.
Thank you.
You have taken a few footsteps into the grant making world. You set up Antigone Foundation in 2007, and you also have set up charities. .everyone was a charity. At the Four, we are in the business of backing high potential, high impact small charities that have got the potential to change things. And we work with lots of philanthropists who are looking to share their resources, so both their skills and their funding. But it's not easy. And I just was interested to hear a bit more about your experiences of, having a foundation and also establishing a charity. And, the fundraising is hard.
Yes, and to be clear, neither of those exist anymore. So, I started Antigone because I was coming out of the most horrifying period of my life, recovering from a car accident, in as much as you ever recover when you're permanently disabled. And it seemed like a way that I could have some control and do some things. But actually, I was wrong, and I shouldn't probably have established a foundation. I think it created more work than was necessary to what I wanted to do, and I could just have given away small amounts of money without having had the structure behind it. Now, that's not for everyone, but with the amounts that I was giving away and how I wanted to do it, on reflection, it wasn't the smartest way of doing it. I think it set up an expectation that wasn't right in the outside world, and also put quite a lot of pressure on me to have a structure, a governance, hire somebody, all that stuff. And actually, I just wanted to be able to support some tricky causes and to find those tricky causes. And I thought that maybe by establishing something, I'd have a further reach, but actually it didn't prove to be the case. So we ran down Antigone in the early kind of 2010s. And then you're right, I've had lots of charities that I've started over time. And I think that that's probably okay when you're trying to put some impetus around things, draw attention to things. Those charities also don't exist anymore. And I'm not hiding that. I'm actually quite proud of that. I think sometimes the right thing to do is to stop something. And that can be a quite empowering thing if you recognize that the work did something for a period of time and now it's time to change it and move on. So with Not Everyone specifically, what I wanted to do is start the conversation around responsible technology in this country. It seems maybe strange now, but back in 2015, 2014, people weren't really worried about technology in the way that we are now. We're beginning to realize now. And I gave myself kind of 5 years to try and change the conversation a bit. And I think we achieved some of that, probably give myself kind of 50 out of 100, not 90 out of 100. But it became clear, particularly with the onslaught of COVID, that the best way for their work to continue is in bigger organizations. And that's what we did. We moved it into two other charities that were increasingly looking at the issues. So that very long answer, I think, should, if nothing else, just highlight that there is no fixed way of doing all this stuff, right? My own personal way of doing it has been to just test things, see what's worked, see what hasn't, and stop them when they haven't. But it doesn't mean you can't always be engaged, and it doesn't mean you can't focus and learn about the issues. But as you say, starting things is hard. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think just finding a course for you as an individual philanthropist or for a team it's just really important to stay open-minded.
I think you don't realise quite how unusual you are in your ability to exit gracefully as well as
maybe. I'm not sure it was gracefully. Thank you for that. But I think it's also having the confidence to stop, right? I think that it's a hard thing to do. Not everyone employed a lot of people. Some of those people lost their jobs. Some people went to work in the organisations we moved the work into. I was lucky. For me, probably, I knew I was going to have other things to do, and I think you can never take that decision lightly, but it can also be the right thing to do, an empowering thing to do for both the subject and for you as an individual. So, yeah, I'm a big believer in stopping, even if it sometimes feels hard.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we notice this a lot in that people with a commercial background who would make really very kind of ruthless decisions quite sort of naturally in the commercial world find it much, much harder to make those difficult decisions when it comes to philanthropy. And it's also something that relates into how they back organisations. So our kind of core is at the Four. We really believe that one of the only real sources for for innovation in the social sector is the small charity and social enterprise sector. But working out how to persuade philanthropists into backing these organisations in a way that really works for them, which is unrestricted funding, we would argue, you need to invest in them, is really difficult. And I'm just really interested to hear your thoughts on how you managed to not, because it often feels like sometimes you have investors. We know people who have worked in VC, people who have got private equity backgrounds, and when it comes to philanthropy, they are making very different decisions than they would make in their commercial space and commercial investments.
Yeah, and sometimes that discipline can be really helpful, and it is good. I think we sometimes are a bit too fixed in the boxes that we put organizations in and the ways of thinking about stuff, and a bit more kind of osmosis and sharing across the commercial world and the philanthropic world is helpful, and you can bring some good discipline to things. In other ways, it can be extremely unhelpful. And what I've perceived, and I particularly perceived this when we were starting the human rights organization Reprieve, which I was one of the founding trustees of. That was a knotty cause. We were fighting torture and the death penalty around the world, particularly in relation to British nationals. Clive Stafford Smith, the lawyer who the work was based around, was one of the first people to go to Guantanamo and fight the cases there, often was representing people accused of terrorism. It was a knotty subject, and people took a long time to kind of warm up to it and see its importance in a wider societal context. And very often, as you say, would give money with a lot of caveats around it. Just for this small bit, I don't want to be associated with that. And I felt very strongly that you should always try and do the opposite, as you've described, that it's so important to back a person or a cause or an issue and not then become kind of demonic about putting too many restrictions on it. You don't do that in the commercial world when you raise money as a founder, and I've done it from the other side. You don't say, well, we'll put it into your customer service center, but we won't let you spend it on marketing. That's not how it works. And yet people seem to become a bit more ego-led when they're doing stuff in the philanthropic world. So I agree with you, but it's those debates continue, I think.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on how we can change the mindsets of philanthropists to think in a more, it seems strange to say this, but in a more investor-like way when they're thinking about philanthropy?
I think highlighting the examples of good practice is really important, and showing the charities that do this really well. I was so incredibly honoured to be the patron of CamFed for a very long time. One of my very best friends, Lucy, was one of the co-founders. When I was starting lastminute.com, she was starting CamFed with Anne Cotton. And, this is true. I would talk to her and say, I can't deal with all the flight tickets going wrong. And she'd say, Martha, shut the F up. I am dealing with chieftains trying to kill girls on their way to school. That was it. That was that stark. It was that binary, and they were fighting the cause of trying to show that girls' education was important before, Michelle Obama, Rihanna, and all the others were piling in on it. And I learned so much from her about how they really built data at the core of what they were doing. They could show a pound in here led to an outcome over there, and they were completely and totally focused and rigorous and tough about showing that chain. So I think highlighting good practice is fundamental, encouraging charities to use that data flow, to not be wishy-washy about it, to really be clear about the outcomes that they're having, and to be very transparent about it. All those things really help. But this is a continual argument. The 20 or so years I've been involved in the peripheries of this stuff, it's always been arguments. The same arguments are knocking around. So I do really think that it's just about making sure that we highlight the bold, show the best practice, and continue to ask the right questions.
One of the things that you said in one of your interviews previously, which I loved, was about how some of the most entrepreneurial, amazing entrepreneurs that you've met have actually been working in charities. And
yes.
For us, that's something that we are continuously trying to highlight, is that people that running the best small social purpose organizations are, they are so energetic, and they are so kind of great in their practice on what they want to do, but they are often really hampered by, one thing is the access to tech and the use of digital in the charity sector. And I just was really interested to ask your thoughts on the fact that it is really hard to raise money for tech in the charity sector. There is a lot of pressure on charities to become more technologically minded. And from our experience, the good ones really want to, but actually it's not something that people really want to pay for. And I had a really interesting conversation with a tech expert yesterday, in fact, who was saying that there is no point in upskilling people in the charity sector in tech, because the moment that they're upskilled in such an incredibly valuable skill, they're probably going to leave the sector because they can go and get paid 7 times more in the commercial sector. But encouraging how we can encourage tech companies to do more skilled volunteering was something that they felt could be hugely valuable. And I just was interested in if you have any experience of well, actually, I know you definitely do, but what your experience is of tech companies sharing skills where it works. And because there are some, I mean, Cisco, I think, is a brilliant example. They have something like an 84% staff sign-up rate for their skilled volunteering, and they offer 10 days of volunteering a year to staff, whereas other big tech organisations aren't so successful. What's your thoughts on this, and how can we make it work better so the sector
it's a big challenge, isn't it? The kind of continued digitization. I mean, I think I'm thinking about this from two halves in a way. I mean, half of me feels depressed, and I'll come to that in a second, but half of me actually feels optimistic, because if you look at where the tools are going themselves, they are decreasing in price and they are becoming easier to use. And, arguably this notion that you're going to need, in quotation mark, tech skills in another decade is going to become less and less relevant, in my opinion, because the tools themselves are just going to be able to do the work so much better for you. You're going to be able to code using AI, you're going to be able to do the stuff that's far from the reach of you and pretty good technologists right now. So I feel kind of optimistic on a long view, because I think that the general trend is towards more accessible tools that won't need special training, that you'll just be able to deploy, and that people who are, my kids are 8, that when they're in the world of work, they're just going to use these things like we just use a Google search. So that's my optimistic, that might be a trend. But I also have worked so much in people who don't have access to technology, and with the kind of digital skills gap and digital exclusion over the last decade, I'm very realistic about where we're at now, and how we get to bridge that gap is still a significant challenge. And as you quite rightly say, it's not just at an individual level, but it's at an organizational level. And why, if you're working in a food bank in the middle of an inner city and you're struggling to get cash, or desperately trying to cope with the demand, why on earth are you going to be worrying about what freaking AI tools you can use? You're just not. And yet, ironically, those are the organizations it might well help the most, because you might be able to manage your costs, or you might be able to do payroll, whatever the different things are. So I do appreciate that both things are true at the same time, probably. And I think there are lots of programs, and Cisco, you mentioned, that do good things. Google puts a lot of work into digital skills. There are, every major tech company has some kind of program. Some of it is a bit digi wash, in my opinion, saying we're doing all this amazing stuff so they can say it, when actually when you drill down, it's like, oh, you're giving me 2 hours of training in your own products and services. I'm not sure that's quite as amazing as we thought. But, there are, of course, Microsoft does a huge amount, as you would hope, because these companies dominate the world and dominate the sectors they're in, and dominate all the things that we use every day. So there is lots of stuff out there if you can get some time to do the research. And I would urge everybody just to spend an hour researching. There's just no excuse not to go onto a free AI tool, whether it's Perplexity or whether it's ChatGPT or anything, and just ask what can be helpful, because that is the starting point, right? But I think some of the things that have been kind of positioned as these great free services from some of the tech platforms are not as amazing as I would like them to be.
And in terms of how we can get more people to think about supporting it, I mean, is it just about more generally encouraging unrestricted funding, or do you think that there is a need, and do you think that it's a fundamental shift that is going to come anyway in terms of funders? Because, I mean, it's really fascinating that some things we find is that however much people think that they are being really forward thinking about funding, something like tech is always, it's always less beguiling as a funder than funding frontline support for children who are leaving the care system, or the mopping of the people's brows.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
no, everyone wants that feeling of I've contributed to something at the front line, don't they? They want to feel as though, look, my hard-earned pound in has equaled somebody feeling better at the other end of it. And that is just a big challenge. I mean, I don't think there's one answer to that question. I think it is just about really showing the examples of why it's just as important to fund structure and to fund, that back office piece as it is to be able to show you're funding that front office bit. It's not going to be one answer to your question. I think it's got to come from multiple different places. But I think there is an understanding among good funders that you need to build organizational resilience, and you have to build capacity as much as you have to build that frontline piece as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's just a shame that the longer tail is taking longer to come around, I think, to that. Yeah. But this takes us neatly to one of the most talked about philanthropists in the last 5 years, largely because she is doing things at such enormous scale.
Yeah.
Mackenzie Scott, for those of you that aren't aware, is the wife or the former wife of Jeff Bezos, who founded Amazon. And she has put enormous amounts of resource into the charity sector and done it in a very private way, but also in a very fast way. She is giving away, as I said in the beginning, she's given away 19 billion, I think it is, in the last 5 years.
Amazing.
And she is doing it in a way that has been described as the holy grail of funding, which is she's giving all of the funds that she gives away as unrestricted funding. I know that CamFed, who you've mentioned, have had support from her.
Yes.
What do you think is it that has driven Mackenzie Scott to do this? Because it's fantastic for the charity sector. And, have you noticed amongst conversations that you might be involved in that it is having an impact? There has been some research that has shown that it's taking longer than people had hoped to filter through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Mackenzie. I have huge respect for her, and especially this week with the faces of those 6-7 tech billionaires over watching Donald Trump's inauguration, which was just so horrifying to someone who has spent a lot of time in the digital sector, like me. And then you think about there are examples of good billionaires who are doing good stuff. And, Mackenzie, as I understand it, was very influential in the founding of Amazon, practically a co-founder. She's slightly been written out of history. So this woman is not without severe commercial sense, as well as this extraordinary capacity to think about philanthropy. But what she's doing is hard, right? I mean, even vast amounts of money are not going to change the dial immediately in some of the most difficult causes that she's putting her funds towards. But I have massive respect for her for two big reasons. Firstly, she's doing it quietly. She is not out there saying, look at me, I've given all this money away. And secondly, she is doing it in a way, I'm sure, which is partly test and learn and just giving stuff to things and seeing what works and not putting different restrictions on it. If you are working at the very sharp edge of some of the causes, she's giving lots of money to underrepresented groups in the US, lots of money to places that have found it hard to get money before. Of course, some's going to work and some's not. It's like venture capital in a way. I'm not drawing a clunky commercial comparison, but probably 50% of what you give is not going to lead to the things that you hoped, but 50% will. And as long as you get the data from that, which I'm sure she's trying to do, and then drive those things forward, I'm sure you can create the scale impact that she'd want. Again, don't want to speak for Mackenzie. She's a far more sophisticated person than me, but I salute her for those two reasons, because I think it's very easy to knock this stuff, but it's also extraordinary to do it, and we should celebrate the fact that she is.
No, I love the fact you say that, because she's come in for so much criticism.
Yeah.
But she also...
From the same old women's sources. I mean, the same noise from the same awful men. And, she's a very smart woman. I'm sure she's thinking very carefully about the impact that she's having. And she's choosing things that are difficult. Difficult things don't get solved overnight.
She hasn't yet, which I'm hoping she might want to do soon. She hasn't yet made many small donations or enabled smaller organisations to apply. I think so far the smallest charities that have had access to her funding is turnover of $1 million.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, she started off giving to really large organisations. Then she ran a programme that was for charities with a turnover between 1 and 5 million. And at the moment, she hasn't said she's got any plans to do any more in the smaller end of the sector. But I mean, do you feel like we do that is a hugely important thing, because that's where the innovation comes from, smaller organisations? Or do you feel the social sector is a bit different from the commercial sector?
No, I'm sure you're right, but I think you've just got to keep an eye on the data all the time, right? I think that there is going to be marginally more risk in smaller organisations, just as there is in the commercial sector. Of course, that's where innovation can come from. Just for Kids Law, a charity I've been so proud to be patron of, is an extremely innovative organisation in the way it was thinking about children in relation to the justice sector, kind of defined them as a category in the UK, managed to change the law, use the media, was working not only helping the children, but also using influence to get laws changed and policy shifted in a very much kind of holistic way. And but tiny charity, 500,000 million, so wouldn't fall into Mackenzie's baseline at all, but doing amazing things, and I know could be scaled up. So, but risky, still risky, right? And so
Yeah.
I think I understand why you have to pick maybe to de-risk things to begin with, but I would hope absolutely that she would see the benefit as well in supporting, thousands of organisations as opposed to hundreds.
Yeah.
But it will come with risk, and she will lose some
Yeah.
opportunities and some money in that.
We would actually argue that it doesn't need to be that risky from the results that we have.
But there
In
you
that
go. Well,
if you
that's what we need. We just
find,
need the data fleshed out
yeah,
on that.
if you find the good people and you spend time
Yeah,
looking for the leadership, then the people, and as I can imagine you would agree with the founders of
yeah,
organisations like Just for Law and Camford, they are going to do what they want to do, whether they have a bad year or they have a good year. They are not going to give up on it, and they are social entrepreneurs, are the most
yeah,
dedicated and determined bunch.
yeah.
I think the charity sector comes in for quite a lot of criticism, particularly the small charity sector, from
Mhm.
people who say, and it makes me laugh a lot because it's often business people who say this, who say, oh, there are far too many small charities. We should regulate so, you can't have so many. They shouldn't be allowed to register, which is obviously something that no one would ever say about the commercial sector, as we've got far too many small businesses. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I agree. No one would really say it about the commercial sector, and you always want that innovation, that attention to big organisations. I think what I'd feel a difference is in the charity sector is just it makes me so depressed to see the amount of bureaucracy that's being created by all those small charities. And if there was a smarter way that you could share that kind of back office resource, that's always the bit that got me. I was interested in prisons and charities that worked in prisons. And one prison I went into once, there were like 85 charities working in that one prison. And they were all raising money, and they were all doing HR, and they were all had finance systems. And you just think, this feels kind of wrong. I don't believe that they were having as much impact and using the money as effectively as they could have done if they'd been a bit more joined up. And that's all, not saying it doesn't work to have that kind of level of attack from each different little place, but there's something that didn't sit quite right because of the doubling up in the resourcing of the bits of the charities that are always hard to raise money for. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do think kind of smarter shared services, organization can say, look, share our tech tools, use our finance systems, use our HR systems, so that don't ever stop providing the innovation in the front end service, but let's think about how maybe we don't have to recreate the back end piece. I think that's the bit that I think we can do a better job at.
I think, yeah, and it is already happening. Definitely, we are seeing more of that, and
Yeah,
are seeing, smart social entrepreneurs are not wanting to waste money on something that they realise, oh, if we shared
yeah,
this, it would be half the price. So I definitely think there's a huge shift already. And they are using, there was a lot of talk a while ago, it's sort of gone a bit quiet, I think, but about how we need special back office resources for charities, when actually, the ones that commercial organisations are using are as, why they work as well for charities.
yeah,
There's not, back office resource
yeah,
for charity. The HR system you need isn't
yeah.
really any different to a business. So yeah, I think there is progress there, but yeah,
That's good.
it is important for maximum impact to be able to see that that's happening. In terms of women in philanthropy, I mean, Mackenzie Scott is obviously a fantastic kind of North Star for us all and a pillar of hope. But the charity sector, I mean, of the organisations that we back, we've got a portfolio now of over 600, and I think at this moment 64% of them are run by women. It is not a problem, women in leadership positions in the charity sector. But how do you think that we might have things moved and changed by the kind of wealth transfer that is happening? And do you think that this is going to see a shift and we'll see more female philanthropists? Because there aren't, it depends on what your definition is, philanthropist, but in terms of giving large sums of money, women definitely have been less visible, I think it's fair to say, than male philanthropists. But what's your take on that?
I mean, it's so skewed by some women, isn't it? I mean, whether it's Melinda Gates or whether it's Mackenzie or even Lorraine Powell Jobs, all these women who I would argue, been co-founders in a lot of those businesses, but's been slightly written out from those stories, who have got such extraordinary market power way beyond, the rest of us. I mean, and that's good because they are, high profile, and although Mackenzie Scott is very low key, she definitely, people know about her. So, I don't know what I feel about this. I think we need a mixture of experiences in all sectors, and I just get depressed when I see anything too heavily weighted in any one direction. It's immensely depressing that there aren't more women in the commercial world in the sector I'm in. But it's also heartening to see women taking leadership roles in the philanthropic sector. It's just a shame that there isn't more, I think, kind of osmosis and sharing of skills across sectors, and that we put people in buckets so quickly, because I really do believe that you can learn commercial skills and you can learn philanthropic skills. If you're a good and talented person who's good at getting stuff done and focused on the right issues, you can work anywhere. And yet I think sometimes we put people in boxes far too early and keep them in those boxes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think one of my dreams is that it becomes really quite normal to have a CV where someone might have jumped from running a charity to working in private equity to going back to running a charity.
Yeah, and I think it's happening more than it did when I started my career. I feel that is the case, but I don't have data on that, so it's just a hunch. It's just a bit of a hunch.
We're definitely noticing it in second careers. I think there's a huge influx of talent that's coming into the charity sector, which as yet I'm not sure that civil society is 100% effective at working out how to use sometimes, but from people who have, got to a certain age and decided that they've achieved everything that they wanted to in their commercial career, or sometimes they've it's not necessarily completely of their choosing, but they then think, how I want to sort of turn slightly and face into some social challenges. How can I use what I've learned? And it's really exciting, the drive that we're seeing towards that, I think, because civil society desperately needs the skills. And, we are in a position where, as a country, we really need to solve the problems that we're facing, and we're not really doing so at the moment in the traditional ways. In terms of where you're going next, do you have an idea about what your next big philanthropic adventure is going to be?
No, I don't. I had a big philanthropic adventure last year because it was 20 years since my accident, and I decided I'd climb the 3 highest mountains in the UK, which, when you can't feel your feet and walk with 2 sticks, is not an insignificant challenge. And I raised over £400,000 for charities doing that. So that was a personal challenge, slightly different question. So I don't know this year. I'm pretty focused on helping the government right now. I know it's not a philanthropic venture, but sometimes it feels a bit like it is, because it's kind of public service. I hope it's going to be able to help charities somewhere down the chain. And I just always like trying to have a mix of things in the work I'm doing. And it, can go up and down. You dial things up and down. So I don't have an answer to that. But I know that for me, it's super important to stay connected to charities. I'm patron of Day One Trauma. I Am the Code. Both those organisations are small and need help growing. So I'll keep focused on that. And as I say, I try and always bring the voices that I've heard from in the charities I've met in the sector into the other work I'm doing, and I hope that can be valuable as well.
As an individual, one of the things that I've noticed when researching you and reading all about all of the different things you've done is that
you that sounds like a terrible way to spend some time.
Fascinating and very inspiring, but is that you are, and this is one of the things I think I loved most about it, is that you are very clearly focused on impact as a person, which is something that we are very much believe in as well for all of the organisations that we work with, and for us as an organisation. But it is something that I think often gets forgotten by people as they get kind of absorbed into their commercial careers and the kind of pressures of earning money and all. How have you always managed? Why do you think it is that you've always managed to keep the impact that you're having as a person front and centre?
Thank you for saying that. That's a very hard thing to answer about yourself, I think. I mean, I can honestly say I find it more surprising I've ever done anything commercial than the other way around. I wanted to be a prison governor when I left school, and then I didn't get into the fast track of the civil service after university. And so it was much more surprising that I ended up doing something that was business minded. And I love business, and I think that business is a force for good and a fundamental importance in, into relationships between what we're talking about, of course. But it's to use a hackneyed expression, it's just the North Star of everything I try and do is has it had an impact, and have I in some small way contributed to trying to keep things moving on, progress. And that's just at the core of my personality, I think.
Well, you're certainly, I think, managing to achieve it from
Thank
where
you.
I'm sitting. I mean, all
Thank
of
you.
the
I
work
appreciate
that you've done
Thank you.
is fantastic, and particularly as a user of government digital websites and all of those
Yes.
sorts of things.
Well, that was one of the hardest things I ever did, but one of the most rewarding. So thank you for saying that.
Martha Lane Fox, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been absolutely fantastic to have a chance to talk to you about what you're doing in the philanthropic space and your thoughts. And we really, really look forward to seeing all of the things that you're going to do next, and the work that you're doing in the public space as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more about philanthropy and social impact, please do follow, share and subscribe to the Brace for Impact podcast on all the major podcasting platforms, or watch the video at www.thefor.org. See you soon.